Karl Nova is a hip-hop artist, author and poet. His first published collection, Rhythm and Poetry, won the Clipper Poetry Award in 2018. The collection reflects on his journey of growth, from childhood to adulthood through the lens of hip-hop culture, and he enjoys travelling and performing to a wide audience with his unique and energetic style. Following a recent event with Just Imagine, where he spent time talking to trainee teachers, Karl spoke to Nikki about his work and future literary projects.
Karl, you may not yet be known by a lot of our listeners, teachers and student teachers, librarians across the country. I know that you were born in London but grew up partly in Nigeria. I'm looking at you now as a young man and wondering what sort of child you were and what childhood was like for you.
I was always a playful, kind of happy-go-lucky child. Sometimes I could be quiet and observant, but from stories from my mother, she said I always used to come out with very ahead of my years utterances, like I'll say something that is quite deep for maybe a 5-year-old and then keep going with playing with my toys or something like that. So when she tells me stories like that, I'm like, did they really happen? But she tells me this is what happens. So we could be walking on the street and I could just look at a man and say, oh my gosh, he has such deep marks on his face. He must be thinking a lot. And then I'll continue walking with her. So I was a happy-go-lucky child who had the tendency to say some stuff maybe that was ahead of my years, according to her. I believe my mum.
You should always believe your mum. As a mother, you should always believe your mum. Yeah. You moved to Nigeria then, and living in both of those countries, have they influenced you as a writer?
Oh my gosh, majorly. So at 7.5, my mother told me we're going on a holiday to Africa. That's what she said. And then we ended up in Lagos, Nigeria. And she dropped me off in my father's house. And I didn't see her for 2 years at first. I just trusted her because what she told me at the time was, you're going to stay here, be a good son to your father. And then when she came back in 2 years' time, she said the same thing because I thought she was coming to get me. But she said, be a good son to your father, and she left. And at the time, I just trusted it. But in retrospect, I've had to deal with like issues of abandonment or feeling left behind. And that influenced me in reading because there's something I always say. She left me with lots of books. So anytime I read those books, I felt as if she was there. She used to hide books under my pillow when I was like 2. Beatrix Potter books, Enid Blyton, and all those children's stories. And as I grew up, she would hide books like C.S. Lewis books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Chronicles of Narnia. So when I got taken to Nigeria, those were the books I had at first. So when I would read a Chronicles of Narnia book, I'll feel close to her. So reading became a very important part of my growing up because it felt like it was the bond I had with her that was not there. You know what I mean? And while being in Nigeria is when I encountered hip-hop music. And my older cousin, who became almost like a mentor to me, and he's taught me what rap is, and that sort of opened my mind and fascinated me so much because I looked up to him so much that I wanted to be like him, and writing my little raps, my little poetry was how I kind of bonded with him. So that was how I was on my path, really.
What was the education system like in Nigeria? Did they introduce you to much poetry through school?
You know what? It was not really a thing.
Right.
Funny enough. But I will say this though, I encountered lots of teachers who noticed I was very good with words and they encouraged me to write essays, and I used to be the one taken to represent the school in essay competitions and things like that. So that did encourage me to write. While at home, my father tried to force literature on me, like Shakespeare and Wole Soyinka, who was like the first Nobel poet laureate from Nigeria at the time. And I was only 10, so I didn't like it. It felt too much for me. But rap music and then slam poetry from Saul Williams. So I watched a film called Slam when I was really young, and that really blew my mind because the power of those words he was saying and how he strung them together. I was like, I have to do this. Yeah. I have to. And I would write secretly. I wouldn't tell anybody. I would just hide it under my bed. And I was like into it for my own personal, joy or hobby, until one day I was found out by my friends. So we used to play a game called the Magic Music Game. We'll make a circle, and then somebody will beatbox, and then when it gets to your turn, you add an instrument. So somebody will add a bass, somebody will add a trumpet. It was just something we were doing. And one day it got to my turn, and they had taken all the cool instruments. So I started rapping something that I had written in secret. And when I did that, they looked at me like, "You mean you can do this? Why didn't you tell us?" I was like, it's just something I do. And that was how I started even performing my little rap. So it wasn't a thing in school more than essay writing and learning how to write that way. But with my friends, it was creative writing and my cousin.
We're going to come to the music more in a moment.
Right.
But just for listeners, I want to say what a physical thing. When you started talking about the rap, how physical you became when you were talking about it. You can't do it without moving your body, without moving your arms. It's
I didn't even notice what I was doing. But it's a thing. I mean, rhythm, or rap is an acronym for rhythm and poetry, which is the name of my book. So in my mind, I've been saying this a lot lately, I don't separate poetry in the conventional way from rap or slam poetry. In my mind, it's all merged together. They're like different roots of one tree. So if I start rapping right now, I'm not saying like it's a rap per se. In my mind, I'm reciting a poem or poetry in a rap way or free verse way or whatever, you know what I mean? So
we're definitely going to dig more into the music, but I wonder whether we could have a first poem. It's like Desert Island Discs. You get your choice of poems here. Your first poem today is Younger Me.
Younger Me. This is not one I do a lot. Okay. Sometimes I imagine walking down the street and by chance bumping into a younger me. I know it's unlikely this will happen, you see, but for a minute, join me and daydream. I would tell myself, enjoy every moment. Live fully in the present. Grab it and own it. Don't be in a hurry to become a grown-up. It's going to happen anyway. The future is going to show up. I know you love to play, but first do your homework. Work hard, then play hard. Put first things first. Respect your elders, because one day you'll be one. Listen twice as much as you speak. You have one tongue and 2 ears. This will make more sense as you gain years. Always be curious. Ask questions. You'll always be a student of life, learning lessons. Dream big. Use your imagination. Just like how you're imagining this situation of me bumping into my younger self. I know it's not going to happen, so listen and listen well.
Mm-hmm. You're very wise, Karl Nova, very wise.
I don't know about that. Wow.
So, obviously music was a great love, and your cousin did you such a favour by introducing you to rap. And before the poetry came, you really got into, you're a hip-hop artist, basically, aren't you? So tell us a bit about that journey.
I had never heard rap music in my life, and my older cousin, who I owe so much to and look up to, he played me the first rap music I ever heard. And it was just, I can still remember in my younger mind thinking, what kind of music is this? He's almost talking in a particular way over music. That was fascinating to me. Is this allowed? I was looking at, is this allowed to be music? And I listened to the complexity of the language and all the, I guess now I know to be metaphors and similes and all that. But at that time, it was just a fascinating use of language and bending things to sound so rhythmical and all of that. And I was like, wow, what is this? And my cousin was like, this is rap music, rhythm and poetry. and it stuck in my mind. And it almost became like school. So the next day he will come. All right, today we're going to talk about the ladies who rap. This is MC Light. This is Queen Latifah. This is this. This is that. And I was like, wow. Then the next day he will come and he'll be like, this is how they rap when they're in New York City. This is how they rap in LA. This is how they rap in London. And I was fascinated as a child. And then he actually encouraged me in my first written piece. It was like us collaborating. I was like his little sidekick. And then I wrote my first rap myself, which I included in my book because I remember it. It was a rap about a soft drink. I'm not going to talk further than that. Get the book. But that was the first rap I ever wrote. And that was when I realized, wow, I can actually put these words together myself. That was quite a discovery for me, you know. Like, wow, I can actually do this and it makes sense. I never showed anybody. But that was a breakthrough moment in my young mind.
Yeah. And rap has quite a stereotypical perception, or people have a stereotypical perception of rap. Gangster rap. But it's so much more nuanced than that, isn't it?
Definitely.
And just listening to you talk about New York rap, and so what are some of these differences, and where do you fit into all of this?
This is a great question, because when I was growing up, there was more of a balance of voices and narratives. So gangster rap was just one part of it. You had Will Smith, who was called the Fresh Prince, and he would rap about parents. He has a rap called Parents Don't Understand. He's rapping from a point of view of a young person frustrated with his parents. You know, he would do all these storytelling, funny comedy raps. You had Slick Rick, who actually has a song called Children's Story, where he's reading a nighttime story to a child, a cautionary tale. You know what I mean? So you had the party raps. You had the cautionary tales, think about what you're doing raps. You had the comedy raps, where it's hilarious and funny. You had raps, people write about their mother, about their brother, about family, about community, about the neighborhood they come from. So I grew up with a more balanced view of what you can say. I didn't grow up feeling the pressure that I had to rap hard and tough from the street. That's one part. But I grew up realizing you can tell your story. I can write a rap about having a drink, or my mother, or going to school, or doing an exam. So in my mind, that is a great gift. It opened up my mind to realize I could write about my life, because my life, I wasn't a gangster. My life was a child in Lagos, Nigeria, trying to find his identity, missing his mom, dealing with being in Nigeria. Am I really a Nigerian? I sound so English to these people. I had a lot of identity conflict, and how am I going to make it? What is my future going to be? So that was a lot of stuff I was writing at the time. What is my future going to be? Am I going to be okay? What's going to happen? Or I'm with my friends today. We're having fun. We're just hanging out. So I learned you can have multiple narratives in writing, and that's such a great thing, because today, unfortunately, as rap has progressed, it's the main narrative out there most of the time is the stereotypical violence and gangster and you're bad and all of that. That was not how I grew up. I grew up with multiple narratives. I'm not saying that tough things don't happen in the street. I've seen some tough things myself. I could tell you stories for days, but that's just one side. It's like what Chimamanda Adichie said in her TED Talk, the danger of a single story. There's always a single story being pushed out about rap that is stereotypical and almost a caricature of itself. In my mind, no, you can rap about anything and be yourself and tell your story. So that's what I'm doing, telling my story.
Which is a really good cue, I think, for another poem. I think we've got to read poetry. And poetry has got a question mark on the end. We have to tell people that, don't we?
Oh, yeah. Poetry with a question mark. So this is one I know. It talks about my discovery of poetry. When I was a kid, poetry seemed boring. Complex words on the page that almost left me snoring. I felt no connection, the language seemed foreign. If it fought for my attention, it was pointless warring. I was introduced to texts held in high esteem. I did recognize the genius, but it meant nothing to me. But all that changed when I heard an MC speak a poetic language that really went deep. It's like I woke up from being fast asleep. Everything seemed to slow down. I felt my soul leap. I was amazed how his words transformed him. From being a skinny geek into someone enormous, he gained energy as he kept performing. Something was awakened in me so dormant. It deeply moved me to pick up a pen, to put down lines of my own, many gems I discovered hidden deep in my soul. I dug deeper, struck oil and found gold. Now I share all these riches that I've found, communicating feelings and thoughts through sound. Now that's poetry I'm glad that I've found, the kind that speaks to me right here and right now. Poetry.
I'm going to leave our listeners to decide poetry or not. I know what I think, and I know what you think.
Yeah.
I did want to talk a little bit. So, there's a saying that an aphorism so well used: the pen is mightier than the sword, and words are not neutral, and the same words can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
And I know that you do have a really strong conscience, and I don't know if moral responsibility is quite the right word, but you're very aware of what you're doing when you go into school, aren't you?
Yeah.
Tell us something about, your views on that.
Okay. Because of as I grew up, the kind of, I guess, poets and rappers that I liked, they always seem to have like a positive, inspirational message to uplift their community or their people or their family. I feel the same sense that when I go into these schools, I want to leave them uplifted. I know it might sound slightly cliche and a bit cheesy almost, but honestly, I really want to inspire and leave them lifted and affirmed that they can believe in themselves and be themselves and, fulfill their dreams and work hard and all those kind of values. So I do feel a great sense of responsibility. I've seen the effect of words creatively spoken, what it can do for somebody, what it can do for me, what it can do for these young people. I've seen it. I've seen how, I hate to say this, and I'm not going to be one who would scapegoat rap music, but I have seen how negative music or words continuously heard over and over again as the only way can paint a picture in a young person's mind that that's what they have to do and where they have to go. And I'm sort of like the counterculture, the subversive person that is going against that and saying, look, you can be cool, quote unquote, and be yourself and still be involved in this style of music or poetry or whatever you want to call it. So I feel a great sense, I don't know if it's responsibility, but it's just a personal conviction to use my words positively, not to shy away from the hard issues that we all face in this world we live in, but not to resort to self-destruction or a destructive end. I believe there's a better way, and that's my mission. It's all over my book, and it's not just in my book, it's in my heart, it's in my soul. It's real to me, and I've seen the effect of positive words spoken creatively over young people, and the way they respond to it. It's amazing. It's like you can see it connect in their minds, and it's like, wow. And I love that. I live for that. I do.
I want to ask you a question. How old do you think the readership of rhythm and poetry is?
Well, this has been the surprising thing.
Okay.
Authors Abroad Kabudu Books who published this were like, this is going to be for 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. And I'm like, cool. But you know what? Adults are loving this. It's really weird. It's quite unexpected. It's like they read it and they were like, it helped me connect with my own child within or something. It's like watching those movies like Toy Story where it's like it's supposed to be a child's movie, but there is such layered that when a person who is older reads it, they see what's in it for them. So I would say obviously young people like 11 to 12, 10, maybe even younger.
So do you mainly visit secondary or primary schools?
Primary and secondary,
Right, so top primary.
Yeah. Because I've worked with kids who are like year 2 and they're loving, because I've included them. I have stuff in here about being chased by a dog down the street. I have stuff in here about being pushed in a puddle. I have stuff in here about doing homework, but written in a particular way that Anybody can feel connected. So I don't know. What I have seen, I can only comment on that, is maybe high primary school, but sometimes younger, secondary school, even adults.
So I think there's an important point here about, books like Rhythm and Poetry in the classroom.
Yes.
As a teacher, you wouldn't necessarily put this on the bookshelf for 7-year-olds, but as a teacher you can read poems from out of that collection. And poetry collections have this capacity, don't they, to span yours and other poets, I think, to span such a wide age range.
Yeah.
But teachers need to know what's in them.
Right.
And they need to pick the ones that are the poems that are going to speak best to their class, and to think about that. So I want to come to another tricksy kind of issue.
Right.
There are so many brilliant poems in here, and it's by no means a collection that's just about violent behaviour. It's a very anti-violent book. But there is one poem in there that, in order to convey an anti-violent message, you have to explain what that is. How can you do that if you're not actually talking about the things that are the issue?
Yeah.
So today, one of the students asked a really good question, and that was, how do you introduce these subjects? How do you introduce this notion of violent behaviour in society to young readers? And she was just very interested in exploring that. So tell us a bit about your thoughts here.
Okay, number one of the reasons why this book, I think, is doing what it's doing out there is I wrote the poetry and included the story behind the piece at the end, and I did that on purpose. Now some poets will be like, you should just write your poetry and let it speak for yourself, don't interpret it, let the person read it. And I was like, cool, I am still leaving it open to interpretation, but I put these backstories behind it to give it context, right? And for teachers to use it as conversation starters and teaching moments. So that's one thing. Now, on the violence thing, it's a very strange world we live in, because I have noticed over time, that students I encounter, they're playing a lot of violent video games with shooting and stabbing in them, and it's entertainment, it seems safe. So they are aware that violence is a thing. Some of them might even become desensitized, and it's just a game, shoot, bang, bang, and all of that, and that's cool. But I think you should start early in incorporating ideas of conflict resolution and peaceful ways of resolving disagreements, because that's what it really stems down to early, because that's what leads to violence. So I think it's okay to talk about anti-violence early, but it's all about how you present it. There's a way I would talk to a year 2 student about anti-violence that is totally different from a year 11 student, because they can handle it in a different way. So it's all about how you convey this message. Now, the poem in question is called No Beef. And really, I'm talking just metaphorically about conflict resolution in a very poetic way. So you can't really say it's graphic even. It's not even as graphic as some of the games these kids play and some of the music they listen to. I've had this poem banned in a school. They were like, you can't really talk about that too much, it's too graphic. And I'm thinking, these kids are gonna go home and play their video games, Call of Duty and Fortnite or whatever. So they are in the violent thing anyway. So surely it should be good to have a message that reminds them violence is probably not the best way to resolve conflict. So that's my answer to that person. I think as young as possible, let conflict resolution be taught, but obviously it's the way you convey that message to them that matters.
And when we talk about age groups and that being relevant, but it's also context and where you find yourself geographically in different parts of the country as well. You just have to address things in a slightly different way, don't you?
And I've been around, so the way I would talk about this type of stuff in London, and not just in London, in particular parts, it will be different from how I might talk about it in Somerset or Northampton. You know what I mean? depends. It just depends on the context, like you said. Very true. I'm very aware of that. And these poems are fluid to fit different contexts. I think that's the great thing about them. I understand from a teacher's point of view, because their concern is they don't want their children, the children that they're teaching, to go home to their parents and say maybe what they've learned at school and alarm the parents, who will just run back and say, what are you talking about? But parents, like, some of your kids are playing very violent games that maybe above their age grade. Surely, if you can't stop them playing the games, you can have a conversation with them about conflict resolution, and maybe violence is not the best way. I think that is a good way to even make them reflect on it and be like, you know what, even though this is a game, maybe it's not the best way to resolve conflict. I think that's great. I'm for that.
Yeah.
That's what No Beef is for.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about when you go into school and the links that you're able to make as a visiting poet.
Yeah.
What you can add to what teachers do and how you can help them to meet the curriculum.
Right. So when I go into school, I'm always thinking, how do I marry what I do with what they're already learning to sort of reinforce it? So I do a lot of things in like figures of speech and poetic devices, simple things as similes and metaphors and personification and all these things. But the trick here that makes it cool is I recontextualize everything they're doing in school in a rap. A rap is cool, but they're thinking, you mean he uses metaphors in the rap, he uses similes in the rap, onomatopoeia, personification, all these things we're learning in school? Wow, I never thought of it outside of school. And it makes more sense to them. So that's what I do. And then also their themes, I put in positive affirmation, confidence in yourself, self-esteem, being respectful, friendship. I have a poem in there about friendship and aspiration and, telling yourself you can make it and be successful and as in school. You know what I mean? So this is stuff that, when an outsider says it, who is supposed to be cool, it sort of makes it sound different from when the teacher is saying it, unfortunately. Sorry teachers, but if you want positive reinforcement of good values and even what they're learning in school, I'm your guy, because this is what I do, you know what I mean? Then I do this verse and they'd be like, wow. And I'm like, do you know that's a metaphor? Yeah, that's a metaphor. That's a noun. It just brings it home to them in a fresh way. So I'm very mindful of marrying what I do with curriculum. I mean, I've done stuff in French. I've done stuff in German. One school asked me to come and work with some sixth formers to help in their mathematics revision. My maths is not the greatest, but you know what I did? I found a way. I went and made them use all their mathematical terms as metaphors and similes in poetry to help them remember what they mean. And it was amazing. And that is the type of thing that can happen in your school.
So another great question that came up for the students today actually was whether or not you were going to consider making an audio book. And I think where that question was coming from, I could understand that, because years ago I had a wonderful collection of poems in my class called Talking Turkeys by Benjamin Zephaniah.
Right.
And I'd read that book, quietly to myself, and I'd think, really I should be reading this aloud to my class, but I can't read it like Benjamin Zephaniah. And I think the student who asked that question today was thinking, I'd really like to read those poems, but I can't read them like Karl Nova, so maybe I shouldn't try. Maybe it's the wrong thing to try to read them out loud. Maybe he'll make an audiobook instead. So I don't know, do you think an audiobook is a good way forward, or is this really a cop-out?
You know what? It's so funny you say that. I've been thinking about audiobooks. One of my first thoughts is that like cheating? Like you're feeding the book to someone with your voice and making them see it only in one way? This is my answer. I have no problem with anybody, teacher, student, reading my poetry and reinterpreting it according to how they understand it and feel it. In fact, at the CLPE Clipper Award, one of the things they did was send our books out into schools and have them choose what they would like to perform. And this young kid called Quincy came on stage and did a performance of my poem called The Dancer. Now, in the poem, I'm talking about a body-popping, breakdancing person who does flips and twists. This guy got on stage, and at the part where I'm talking about him doing a backflip, he does the backflip on stage. My heart was in my mouth. I'm like, I don't want it to be somebody cracked their head open because of my poetry. This is not what I want. But that was how he felt to interpret the piece. And I love that. So even though it's nice to hear how the author, interprets his work in his voice, actually physically hearing it, which is cool for audiobooks, I am very open to any teacher, student, interpreting it in their own way. Now, would I do an audiobook? I would consider it, but I don't want you to be fixated on how I do it only. I want you to find your own ways of reinterpreting. So watch out. You might hear an audiobook from me. Now, CLPE have like a bunch of videos of me actually reading like a lot from my book. So if you want to hear, and it's open source. So if you want to check out how they are, you can find them, how I do it in my voice. So I understand what you mean, because the discussion is, what if I was speaking patois? I'm not Jamaican, by the way, and I don't try it, because when my Jamaican friends hear me try to do patois, they're like, what are you doing? So if it was a poem written in a patois style that sort of needs to be read in that way, how would I go about challenging that? Because we don't want to exclude it and say just because we can't speak patois, we should not include it and try to read it in the way it is written. So I guess we have to consider that as well.
It's tricksy. It's a little bit tricksy.
It's a bit tricksy. Yeah.
I think to kind of extend that as well, the very act of performing a poem is an act of interpretation.
True.
And I think, I'm guessing here that you might read a poem one day and a certain emphasis will come through, and even you could read it another day and it will sound different.
This is it. This is the thing about live poetry. I cannot say I will say a poem exactly the same way or perform it every single time I do it. That day I might be thinking so much about, I don't know, writing, and it will come out with me emphasizing the bits about actually writing. Another day I might be happy, and it comes out me feeling so elated about writing. You know what I mean? So that's why you can't be fixated. If I did an audiobook and you heard it only in the way I felt at that time on that day, if I came to your school or you saw me live somewhere, it might be totally different as well. So you have to be open to the fluidity of interpretation of poetry and performance.
I think what we need to do to say thank you to you is hear another poem first. So I would love you to choose this last poem.
All right. This was a tough one, but I hardly really do this one, but it's called Words, because I think words are important. So this is Words. Every day doing dumb things on their smartphones. It could be him or her using the words to hurt. Every other line is a curse, grabbing for attention, for a response they search. Keyboard warriors love to start a war. Those hungry trolls are starving for more. Maybe they're angry or just bored. The goal is a reaction they want to score. They say to themselves it's only harmless banter, but sometimes things said are more deadly than terminal cancer. Words have power, watch what you say. Whether you type them online or speak them, they carry weight. But wait, maybe you don't really care about the thoughts and feelings you put in the air. One day you'll realize words are like seeds, and when planted, you will reap deeds. Words have power, watch what you say. Whether you type them online or speak them, they carry weight. But wait, really you should care about the thoughts and feelings you put in the air. Words.
Karl Nova, it's been a pleasure to meet you today, to hear you talk to the students and to hear you read your poem.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you for having me.